Ladies and gents, hello and welcome to today's video. In front of me is a 2018 Mac Mini, and we're going to be discussing if this computer is still worth it in late 2024. So without further ado, let's get into the specs of my specific unit. So as you can see here are the specs for my unit. I've got the upgraded 3.2 gigahertz 6-core i7. That is a 12-threaded processor. I've got the Intel UHD 630 graphics, and we have 32 gigabytes of DDR4 memory. Of course, we're running macOS Sequoia. So that is the specs that we've got today. That is pretty much the high-end configuration. At least it is for the CPU, and the RAM is pretty close to being maxed out as well. Now, if we head into more info, I can show you guys the storage. So as you can see here, I've got the 500 gigabyte SSD. That's kind of the mid-range for what these units came with. If we head into Safari, we can look at the complete spec sheet. So for the CPU, you could get a quad-core i3, 6-core i5, and a 6-core i7. The i7 is the only one that has hyper-threading. So this is 6-core 12 threads, the i5 is 6-core 6 threads, and the i3 is 4-core 4 threads. These are 8th gen Intel CPUs, so they were a significant upgrade over the previous generation processors, and certainly a huge upgrade over the 2014 Mac Mini that this replaced with its dual-core 4th gen Intel CPUs. Moving down to memory, this thing came standard with 8 gigabytes, but you could go all the way up to 64. Keep in mind, this is one of the few Apple computers with upgradable RAM. So my specific model actually came with 8 gigabytes, but I purchased 32 and I upgraded them myself. The storage, however, is not. This is soldered on, and the configurations range from 128 gigabytes all the way up to 2 terabytes. Mine's in the middle with 512. Graphics are the same for all of the models, Intel UHD 630, and these are not impressive by any means. This is a big shortcoming for this computer. We'll talk about that a little later on. One thing this computer is really good at is display outputs. You can do up to 3 displays at 4K 60 Hertz. That's much better than the newer Apple Silicon Mac Minis, apart from the M2 Pro, but that is in a price range of its own, not really comparable to what we're talking about here. You can also do 5K at 60 Hertz, and you have a plethora of ports, which we're going to get into here in just a moment. That is about all for the specs. You can read a little bit more here if you're interested. You've got Wi-Fi, 802.11ac, Bluetooth 5.0 is nice to have on this, and you could actually configure this with gigabit Ethernet. There are the rest of the specs. All right, so now that we've got the specs of my unit and you can see what this thing could have come with, now let's talk about the ports on the exterior of the Mac Mini. So here's our Mac Mini. It is in the wonderful space gray color, something Apple went away from until the M2 Pro. This is the only other space gray Mac Mini, but here are the ports on the rear. So we've got our power button, power connector, Ethernet port, 4 USB-C ports. These are good for Thunderbolt 3 speeds, HDMI 2.0, and 2 USB 3.0 ports, and a headphone jack. Here's the slot for the fan, and this gets used quite a bit because of our power hungry and very hot Intel CPUs. The rest of the device just looks like a regular old Mac Mini, but I do love this gorgeous space gray color. So that's enough of the ports. Let's get this thing plugged back in, and we're gonna talk about performance. All right, so here we are. I went ahead and I ran Geekbench 6, and these are the results. The single core score was 1444, multi-core came in at 5362. So these are certainly better than a majority of the Intel Macs that Apple has offered over the years, but in comparison to even the M1 Mac Mini or the M1 MacBook Air, these scores are not very good. So keep in mind, we are running the high-end i7. This is the 8700B, 6-core 12 threads, 3.2 gigahertz. This is the best CPU you could get in the 2018 Mac Mini. So these scores are as high as you're gonna see for this model. I went ahead and I also ran the graphics benchmark, and our metal score is 6162. That is really low compared to what Apple offers now, and even some of the 2020 models, especially the Apple Silicon models. I'll go ahead and I'll put some other numbers up there so you guys can see what we're comparing it to. But for graphics, the Mac Mini 2018 is not gonna be your best friend. All right, moving on, I did some real world stuff. So we've got our benchmarks, but I also edited an entire video. This is a 4K 60 FPS video. It is the 2018 Mac Pro that was never updated. This one was running iOS 12, and I edited the whole thing on here. And I will say the editing process was just fine. Playback is pretty smooth. Scrubbing through the timeline is just as I would have expected. The downsides came with exporting. So when I export videos, I typically use the Apple ProRes preset. So if I were to export this, I'll do Apple ProRes 422 proxy. That puts this in at around 37 gigabytes. Now, when I edit this on my main computer, which is an M2 Pro, MacBook Pro 16-inch, this takes like between, I would say, 30 to 90 seconds to export this. When I did the same thing here on the 2018 Mac Mini, it took over 20 minutes to export this clip onto the desktop. So that is pretty slow, but in the scheme of things, you know, if you're editing a video, which if you ask me, the actual editing part is probably more important. So the editing was smooth, it was just the export speed that was tragically slow. So I guess you can edit your video just fine and then set it to export and then go do some other stuff while it works in the background. But I must say, Apple Silicon for video editing is a huge game changer, and even a base configuration M1 Mac Mini with just 8 gigs of RAM is gonna do better than this thing with the i7 and 32 gigabytes. All right, so video editing is certainly possible, but it's gonna be a little bit slower. Now, something else I want to show you guys is the disk speed test. I think this is important because with a computer, especially a Mac Mini, you're probably going to be moving files around. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a 5 gigabyte read and write speed test. So this is going to show us how fast our SSD is, and this one is actually pretty quick. So our write speeds are right around 2 gigabytes per second, a little lower. Read speeds are at about 2.7 gigabytes per second. So pretty quick, and honestly, not that far off from even the newest Apple M3 computers. So in terms of disk write and read speeds, this thing is very capable, and you really should not notice any slowdowns when moving large files around on your computer. All right, one more thing I want to show you guys is the gaming performance. I typically do this in my videos because it's a very consistent game that demands a lot out of both the CPU and the GPU, and of course, that game is Minecraft. So even if you don't play Minecraft, you can still appreciate that this is a fairly demanding game. This game is optimized for Apple computers, so it gives me a good chance to really show off the capabilities for these machines as they pertain to gaming. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the resolution to 1080p because this thing is unfortunately not able to output 4K. I mean, it is able to output it, but we are not going to be getting very good frame rates at all. So we'll do 1080p. We'll set the simulation distance down to like 6 or 7. We'll go ahead and render at 12, and I'll make sure that this is set to full screen. All right, we've got 1080p set as the resolution. We're gonna be loading into a creative world here and seeing how this Mac Mini performs. All right, so here we go. We'll go ahead and fly up into the world here, and it is actually looking pretty smooth. I am recording this video in 4K 60 FPS, so hopefully you guys can get a feel for how this looks in terms of frame rates. So as we fly through the world here into a pretty demanding area with a lot of trees, a lot of snow, the game is actually doing pretty well. It is able to render the map out in front of us, which is indicative of CPU performance, and the frame rates are actually pretty stable. I'd say we're getting between like 30 to 50 frames per second here, and that's going to show us the GPU performance. So the i7 with its 6 cores, 12 threads, is still a fairly capable processor, and it is able to run this game just fine. And while the graphics are pretty slow at anything else, they do actually handle Minecraft pretty well. So certainly a playable experience here, and a lot of times I'll try to sprint towards the edge of the map and see if we're able to reach the edge before the computer can render the new parts of the map, and I think we are not going to have any problems there. This thing is able to keep multiple lines of chunks open as we fly towards the edge. So very good experience here, and I can say without a doubt that 1080p Minecraft on a 2018 Mac Mini is certainly playable, especially if you've got the i7, and I'm sure the i5 would handle this just fine as well. The i3 may see a little bit of stuttering, but I do think you would probably get away with these same settings on that base configuration as well. So that's going to do it for our Minecraft test. All right, so some other stuff I want to talk about. These are just kind of some miscellaneous things. The first is macOS support. So as you can tell, this Mac Mini is officially supported on macOS Sequoia. Now, you are not going to get all of the features, and a big one you're going to miss out on is Apple Intelligence, but that is only available on computers with Apple Silicon. So anything with an Intel chip is just not going to get Apple Intelligence. I do think, however, this is going to be the last year of macOS support for the 2018 Mac Mini. I think a lot of us were surprised with the number of Intel computers Apple kept around, but I think it's safe to say that the Mac Mini from 2018 is going to be dropped next year in the 2025 macOS update. But for now, you're good, and you will probably get security features for a couple years after that, especially considering how long Apple sold the 2018 Mini, even after its release in 2018. Something else that's worth mentioning is the ability to natively run Windows. So we've got a dedicated application in here. It is called Boot Camp Assistant, and what it does is you can partition your hard drive, and you can keep macOS on half of it, and you can install Windows 10 or Windows 11 on the other half. So you can dual boot between macOS and Windows. That's something that is not quite as easy to do on Apple Silicon. Something else worth mentioning for the 2018 Mini is the ability to use external GPUs. So thanks to the Thunderbolt 3 ports and the fact that it actually has an Intel chip, you can hook up external graphics cards to your 2018 Mini, and you can significantly increase the performance of that computer. So I know the AMD graphics cards are supported natively. I think there are workarounds to get NVIDIA chips working as well, but it's pretty cool to be able to do this. And the fact that you've got those 4 Thunderbolt ports on the back really means that you can plug in that external drive and still have 3 ports left for accessories. That's still a port more than an Apple Silicon computer, which is not capable of using an external graphics card. So that is one pro of this Mac Mini, is you can plug in an external GPU if your workflow really demands an aggressively powerful graphics card. One more miscellaneous thing to talk about is the heat from this computer. Of course, it's Intel. Intel runs hot, and this Mac Mini is no exception. So if Intel Power Gadget was working correctly, I would show you that this thing would probably be in the 80 to 90 degree range, even around idle. And especially if we're doing something demanding like video editing or playing games, this thing definitely gets hot, and you will hear the fan if you are pushing this thing to its limits. Even something like scrolling through photo libraries, or if you're in Safari, especially if you use Google Chrome, this thing is going to get hot and you're going to hear that fan spin up. So that's something to keep in mind when thinking about a 2018 Mac Mini, is the fact that it's going to be loud and it's probably going to be sitting on your desk just like this one is. You're going to be able to hear it. So even just feeling this right now, it is warm to the touch. This thing has really not been doing a whole lot. I mean, we did play a little Minecraft for a couple minutes, but overall, the Mac Mini 2018 is a hot computer, and it's going to make some noise if you use it for anything outside of just everyday tasks. And that's going to bring me to the conclusion of the video, where we decide, is this thing worth it in 2024? I think the short answer is probably not, but if you can find one for a good deal, I'd say, depending on the specs, anywhere from $200 to $300, or if you go up to that 1 or 2 terabyte storage option, maybe up to the $400 range. It is certainly a capable computer for everyday tasks like managing photo libraries, doing notes, calendar, email, Safari. I mean, you can do a little gaming, you can do some light video editing. It's very versatile with all its ports, and it runs the most recent version of macOS Sequoia. You do lose a lot of features like no Apple Intelligence, and you're gonna miss out on the future macOS updates. It's also not quite as fast or snappy as the Apple Silicon chips, and it runs hot and you're gonna hear the fan. But it is a good computer, and I can recommend it for the right price. And if you need multiple monitors, then this is also a good option for you. If you wanna use Boot Camp with Windows 10 or Windows 11, then you're gonna have to use a Mac Mini with an Intel chip, unless you know how to do that on Apple Silicon. So that's gonna do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick look at a 2018 Mac Mini and whether or not it's worth it in 2024. Let me know down in the comments if you have one of these computers, what are your thoughts on it? Or if you're deciding about getting one, what are some things that you think would be good to know? All right, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video, hope you found it helpful. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in another one of my videos.